Fallout 76's next major update is live on the player test server, giving players a first look at the new map expansion into the Skyline Valley. Located south of the Savage Divide, sandwiched between the Ash Heap and Cranberry Bog, it brings with it plenty of new locations to explore, places to set down your camp, familiar faces, and plenty of unfamiliar ones too, which include a new boss enemy, the Storm Goliath, all under the watchful eye of one of Fallout's craziest storms, which, going off teasers in Part 1 at least, could be one of the most fascinating narratives added to the game in years. In Part 1 of the player test server, 2 new public events are available to play, and most of the new locations are ready to be explored, with story quests set to follow in Part 2. In today's video, we're running through all the new locations, the new public events, and some of the new creatures and factions that call this region home, before finishing with a selection of very interesting Easter eggs that potentially tease future content. Let's dive straight in with a closer look at the map itself. Its design and many of the locations found within were heavily based on the real Skyline Drive, with roads snaking down into the valley below, also found on the in-game map. Located centrally, directly below the Eye of the Storm, Dark Hollow Manor is the centerpiece of the new region, surrounded by blasted trees, crevices, and patrolled by a new enemy type, the Lost. Most of the interior is currently unavailable to explore, although a hidden entrance in the basement leads to something we'll be covering later on in this video. Overlooking the valley, the Hawksbill weather station and a handful of research sites scattered around the expanse are intrinsically linked to the storm itself. Elsewhere, you can find a ranger bunker, several watchtowers, and a handy trading center, with some old friends also trying their luck in this region. Super mutants have desecrated a historic landmark, an ill-fated temporary alliance between Foundation settlers and Crater Raiders ended badly, cultists have found a new cave, and a very surprising faction have liberated a pioneer scout camp. Except all isn't what it seems here, and deep within the Shining Creek Cavern, through an inconspicuous grate, a sprawling vault contains creatures that haven't been seen in the Fallout series for a very long time, as well as many secrets that might go some way to explaining the strange affliction affecting the Gaulified dwellers of Vault 63. As located in the Ash Heap, this vault has also significantly changed in this update. First teased on the official artwork for Skyline Valley, the vault door has indeed absolutely thrown off its hinges, travelling an astonishing distance to the forest region, where players will now find it embedded in the road. I'm not going to say exactly where this is, but even new players will no doubt be stumbling upon this in their travels come June. But heading inside the vault now, things aren't much better inside. Collapsed sections with a vault-wide emergency declared. We learn on a terminal inside that this vault actually had a usable vault metro system at one time, which is a pretty unique feature that begins to make perfect sense with the revelation that Vault 63 is possibly one of the largest we've ever seen in the series so far, with multiple sections accessible via different locations in the new region Skyline Valley. We're heading to the Eye of the Storm first to explore the basement of Dark Hollow Manor and find the first entrance. And the storm really has done a number on this place. The hellscape is enveloped in an endless red fog, lightning flashes a constant feature on the horizon, and in amongst the collapsed sections of road, the Lost are waiting. A new variant of Ghoul, these Lost engineers were once dwellers of Vault 63, and have seemingly been infused with lightning from the storm itself, some even appearing to materialize next to you within a gold-coloured mist. Heading inside the mansion, remnants of a battle between Vault security guards, the Lost, and Feral Lost, which will actually explode upon contact, are pretty much the only feature I could find. With most of the doorways blocked off or inaccessible, I think it could be possible that these are being saved for future quests, which we can test in Part 2. But one notable new asset in here is this painting, depicting what appears to be a man and a woman with their daughter. And downstairs in the basement, for a secret entrance behind a brick wall, we find a vault elevator which takes us down into Vault 63 for the first time, where perhaps we can actually meet the people in this painting. A vault completely inhabited by ghouls, the dwellers of 63 have been on their own journey while we've been adventuring. Almost entirely comprised of scientists and heavily armoured security guards, the vault is run by Overseer Hugo Stoltz, who eventually, after this official sounding line,
"To shelter humanity for a new tomorrow. What other purpose could it possibly serve? I would advise you not to speculate any further."
reveals a bit more about what they've been up to.
I wanted a vault that wasn't just about preserving the past, but continuing to build a new future. Climate control, increased life expectancy, and the deadliest weapons to ward off would-be survivors of the apocalypse. This fell through once we were afflicted with this ghoul phenomenon, with radiation and illness no longer seeming to be a concerning factor. Then much of our research became focused on improving our new standards of life. and preservation against the feral affliction.
He himself is especially unique as the first non-hostile lost variant of Ghoul we've actually seen in the update. But I think it's also possible he might be the man in this portrait. His German origins also have a bearing on the naming of certain locations, which we will explore next. But first it's time for a quick chat with Audrey Stoltz, where we learn a bit more about what they're doing.
Fine, the quick version then. A few years after the bombs, our residents were fighting against going feral, a complete loss of their minds. All of our research facilities pointed their efforts towards solving that, the weather machine included. By complete accident, we discovered that close proximity to the machine had a sort of reversing effect on the symptoms of feralization. Things didn't shake out as planned, though.
Some definite signs that perhaps we could see some more tie-ins to events in the Nuka-World DLC and the Fallout TV series, which also both explored the manner in which ghouls become feral. Focusing now on the repeated mention of the weather station and meteorology, we move on to a group of scattered research sites found in Skyline Valley, which we learn on terminals inside are actually harvesting the lightning we keep seeing. A total of 3 research sites can be found, with research site Saxony located north of the new cultist cave Old Cremora Mines, research site Rhineland north of Rapidan Camp, which is actually based on the real retreat used by US President Herbert Hoover during his administration from 1929 to 1933. More on that location later, as beneath it, well, there's a pretty big teaser for some potential future content. And at research site Bavaria, on the eastern edge of the new region, we find one of the new enemy types introduced with the update, the Thrasher, a giant mutated turkey which if engaged in combat can pack quite a punch and utilizes a breath attack similar to a Wendigo, but are most often found patrolling nearby or at the sites themselves. The Lost are often present too. Can't wait to learn more about them once the questlines have dropped. These lightning catchers also feature in the first of the 2 new public events as we run through Dangerous Pastimes next. Located at the Thunder Mountain substation, right next to the Skyline's drive entrance, Dangerous Pastimes amounts to collecting multiple harvester parts before installing them on the lightning harvester located here, followed by charging the repaired machinery by killing the hordes of attacking Lost, which includes charged Lost champions, wearing this really cool new looking suit of power armor, which we will be able to get our hands on according to the latest data mines. But these smaller locations pale in comparison to the very familiar weather-based machinery located within the Hawksbill weather station, which is where the new boss fight Neurological Warfare will take place, and located inside where we find the Vault 63 Meteorological Center. Overlooking the entirety of the valley, this enormous weather station is perhaps the largest new exterior location added with this update. Equipped with a vertibird and guarded by robo-brain sentries, clearly no expense was spared, and like most of the scientific locations we can find, is tied to the vault. Heading inside, we find multiple power armor stations, banks of terminals, and yet another framework for a vault atrium. But the most interesting detail we can find is located upstairs, and for now at least, it's something we can only take a peek at using camera mode. Prior to this update releasing, I theorized that the storm might be connected to Fort Atlas in some way. The atmospheric terraforming laser accelerator, powered by an ultrasight battery pre-war, was successful in early testing, managing to manipulate weather in Appalachia, evidenced by a snowstorm covering the mountains near the Pleasant Valley ski resort. Inside the meteorological center, we can just about make out what looks like a very similar machine to the one found in Atlas. Perhaps these two are connected after all, but potentially the biggest clue that these two are linked is this character found in Vault 63. James Oberlin, head of security, who is very likely the same Lieutenant Colonel James Oberlin once in control of the Atlas project. It seems that his research did continue after the bombs dropped after all. On top of the research station though, we find the new boss fight, Neurological Warfare, where players will go up against the Storm Goliaths. Formerly known as the Storm Lord in early data mines, this boss fight is actually comprised of several of these titanic constructs battling it out against the 76 dwellers. Stomping, swiping, and unleashing blasts of Tesla energy, they're invulnerable to electrical damage and can be stunned momentarily. Perhaps the most interesting detail once the fight is decided is taking a look at their abnormally sized brains. In a facility teeming with robo-brains, these titanic constructs have taken things up a notch, but discovering the creation process of what these actually are and what these brains are actually from remains a mystery for now, although I would expect that Overseer Hugo Stoltz has something to do with it. Moving on from Vault Tech and Vault 63, let's talk a bit about the other locations and factions you can discover in Shenandoah, starting with a very surprising one. On your travels along the winding roads, you may come across the South River Bridge, guarded by liberators and flying the communist flag. Continuing up the road, we arrive at Camp Liberty, Death to America painted over the sign. and inside is an actual communist holdout full of American communist soldiers wearing a mixture of painted armor and insurgent outfits. Typically, communist remnants have always been Chinese in Fallout, but not this group. Exploring a little around the campsite, we find chairs set up at the back and a projector playing a short instructional video. Let's give it a watch. A pioneer is obedient, bolded up, knowledge intersected with a hypnotic flash, and a very on-the-nose hammer and sickle. Keep it quiet within camp. I think we have our answer to how these people ended up flying this flag, except not quite. As investigating the camp more closely and entering the camp leader's office, we discover that this was in fact originally a government experiment. Operation Sleeping Giant was originally designed to test the susceptibility of American children to communist propaganda and brainwashing. They tested this by brainwashing a selection of children at this camp over a 15-year period, creating sleeper agents who could be activated with the correct phrase. And this experiment ultimately worked too well, as on a different terminal in the main building, the same children, now adults, discovered what had happened to them and ended up becoming a communist cell, learning that more sleeper agents were available for activation in Appalachia, concocting a plan to gather all of them at the camp. The Storm ultimately had other ideas though. Nearby we see the aftermath of what looks like a torture scene, so it would seem that the agent assigned to oversee this experiment likely didn't meet a pleasant end. Elsewhere in camp we find an animal in training, a Yao Guai, and in the target practice range a selection of members of other factions, a Blue Ridge Caravaneer, Raider and Settler. And finally in this cell the remains of a responder, perhaps one of the rangers from the ranger station, which we'll be discussing later on. A really interesting inclusion with a good twist. There is also another little Easter egg on this terminal which mentions the discovery of the Brown House and rumours that the government had a secret facility there. This location can be found at Rapidan Camp and does contain a very interesting Easter egg which we will be revisiting at the end of the video, as it teases something potentially very big regarding future content. But moving on, Shenandoah has multiple caves to explore, and inside old Cremora Mines we discover that the dim ones have made it out this far as well. This cave is a little bit different to what we're used to seeing. Emblazoned on the entrance we find a series of markings that will also be repeated inside. Reading a note inside the cave we learn that the cultists also see this region as a new world, calling on the Mothman to guide them with obligatory light and divine buzzing. Prophet Alex is the leader of this group and has led them very far from home, but a flame has also been found to kindle their spirit. Heading further in we find those other symbols on the walls, before finally reaching what may be the bottom, and in the centre of the room, a pyre, surrounded by more of the symbols on the floor, in what looks like a kind of summoning circle. Let me know in the comments if any of these symbols jump out at you, but heading back outside, north of the cave, we find Naked Creek and the remains of a massacre. The Blue Ridge Caravan once tried to set up a pit stop at this location, but now we find it overrun by thrashers, which might include alphas. Unlike the standard variant, alphas will attack on sight, and we find them already fighting a second new variant of mutated bird. Post-war pheasants, which literally cannot fight back. Putting a stop to this, it'd be really cool to see this pheasant actually added to the taming pool. Finishing up here, let's head north to visit a national landmark of Virginia. Teased on the official artwork, this is the Natural Bridge, a historic landmark located in the real West Virginia and in Fallout, has been ruined by super mutants. They've added their own mutant flair to this location, but you can stop to have a read about it on these placards found here. You can also find mutants near the abandoned convoy, the remains of this ill-fated expedition sinking into a marsh. And you can also find them guarding this lookout tower, which has a very useful feature of course, for unlocking all the locations on your map. In this new region you can find several of these: High Knob Lookout, Old Drag Lookout, and Stony Man Lookout. Heading over to each of them will unlock locations atop the tower by surveying the area. The most interesting in my opinion is Old Rag Lookout. Split down the middle, a group of settlers and crater raiders try to form a community united by one goal: surviving the storm. Inside this trailer you can find a note with a set of rules: no stealing, no murder, and an equal number of both parties used for scavenging. And that was it. The bodies found around the campsite suggest that this did end up being a pipe dream after all. Whether they killed each other or were killed by the Lost isn't completely clear, although this settler outside perhaps suggests that they did ultimately fall to infighting. Located around the edge of the valley you can find some pretty chill spots in amongst the severe weather conditions. Located on the northwest corner of the map, Three Ponds has a pretty impressive waterfall feature, and no enemies spawn here, which is a welcome change. After clearing out a pack of wolves, taking in the view from Makeout Point wasn't too bad either, but was clearly the last resting place for some couples pre-war. Finishing up with familiar enemies, Mirelurks and Mole Miners also make an appearance at two separate locations. Miners gravitated to the Big Meadows gas well, which isn't too surprising, but exploring the location a bit more, we discover what appears to be a series of unfortunate accidents that took place here pre-war, but each of these might have actually been foul play. As we read through a series of terminal entries about some incident reports, and a final mention that a new worker Osborne was seen hanging around the area when one of the incidents occurred. On a different terminal in the same location, this is taken even further. Confronted over his strange pattern of behaviour, Osborne proclaimed he was a true patriot and was subsequently reported for communist tendencies. Were these deaths really accidents, or was there something more going on here? As we know from the scout camp, there were communists operating in this area, or was this simply just a misunderstanding? Hemlock Springs Dump is where you can find the Mirelurks, and a large dumping ground. I'm yet to dig around this too much yet for any potential Easter eggs, so let's move on to the trading post next. Located southeast of the Dark Hollow Manor, the trading post is one of the few locations where you won't be fighting anything. Under this tree you can find all the amenities and benches usually found at a train station, even with quest posters on this board. The only living NPC you can find though is the poorly tuned Mr. Handy, Murray, who mistakenly believes James, the trading post owner, will return with his partner Jewel at a later date, but reading this note inside reveals that they had no intention of coming back. Murray is also mistakenly attributed to the other campsters and Wesley as being lazy for not getting out of bed for days, when they in fact dead, clutching this note that you can also read. Moving back up to the top of the map, a trio of locations are partially explorable in the current PTS, the Ranger Station, Shenandoah Visitor Center, and Skyline Drive entrance. The entrance is the perfect starting point to head on down through the valley, but for now the visitor center seems to be closed. Unless it's a problem on my version of the PTS, presumably this will open up very soon. We can head inside the ranger station though, which surprisingly isn't fully abandoned. Inside we find the cowardly ranger Cavern, who has his own Gallery de Cavern spread across the wall, which is a collection of different memorabilia. Speaking to him, he will fill you in on events just after the bombs dropped, and explain why he's the only ranger still left at the bunker. Moving to the southern edge of the map now, it's time to have a look at the Slumber Mill Motel. Down the road from the waste dump, the Slumber Mill Motel and Red Rocket opposite are both crawling with enemies. Lost stalk the gas station, and in the Slumber Mill, some robots will try to delay your exploration. Seeing them off easy enough, the most interesting feature I could find here was in fact the basement, as this location, which will be a running trend with the remaining spots today, was actually more than it seems. A Vault-Tec elevator and Vault-Tec supplies are found within this space, although currently there doesn't seem to be any accessible parts to this location. Considering how many other locations though are tied to Vault-Tec, it definitely highlights how expansive Vault 63's influence was in this region at least. The penultimate location in today's video is another one pulled from the real world. Rapidan Camp in Shenandoah National Park in Madison County, Virginia, was built by US President Herbert Hoover and his wife Lou Henry Hoover, and served as their rustic retreat throughout Hoover's administration from 1929 to 1933. In Fallout, this history isn't too dissimilar. The Mr. Handy inside will tell you as much, while he's not complaining about the effect the storm is having on the flowers outside. Split into several buildings, which are the Brown House, the Secret Service office, and the Prime Minister's office, only one of these actually has something interesting hidden beneath it. And as teased in the communist holdout earlier on, it is indeed the Brown House, as heading downstairs, we find the entrance to a military facility, which is currently inaccessible. But camera mode, we can take a quick look anyway. There is a full-blown bunker down here, not too dissimilar to locations like the Enclave bunker. You should be able to visit this during quest lines later, but thanks to this image from another player who did manage to get down here, there is a very big teaser for potential Enclave content. On this back wall we see mention of Raven Rock, the Poseidon oil rig, and the Norfolk Naval Base. This is most likely inspired by the real Naval Station Norfolk, located in Virginia, but is the headquarters and home port of the US Navy's Fleet Forces Command. Last but definitely not least, we have a cavern, which on my first trip seemed pretty inconspicuous, but actually hides a very big secret. To the east of the manor we find Shining Creek Cavern. Heading inside we're met by luminous plants, first seen in locations like the Deep, and is filled with a selection of critters to clear whilst exploring. Heading through this section we do eventually reach another section of Vault 63 though. Again, considering how far away we are currently from the manor, this vault extends very far. This particular doorway to the organic sector is locked, but we can read a terminal nearby where we learn that the dwellers were investigating the gas levels coming from this cave, as the toxic gas was clearly a problem, spreading from the cave into sections of the vault, with the levels continuously rising, a regulator being a potential fix. Moving on through the cave system, dodging a deathclaw along the way, it turns out that this grate was actually a second entrance into the organic sector, and what followed? This vault is huge, corridors spanning the entire cave system, leading to multiple labs, sections filled with the lost, because yep, they're down here too. There were pharmaceutical wings, microbiology R&D, and in this lab space for testing, a very strange but kind of familiar cadaver that resembles a certain plushie currently found in-game. No name is actually given to this entity, but are we actually looking at the return of the Wanamingo? There is no definitive answer found in this space at the very least, but on a terminal found nearby, we can read about experimental reports from a series of drug tests. And there's also mention in here of a cadaver coming to life, attacking a member of the staff. And this particular notice was actually sent by James Oberlin, who of course was formerly of Atlas, now head of security for Vault 63. But what were they doing down here? There's more which I'm not going to show as we're entering heavy spoiler territory, but the lab's scientific wings and much more just keep going and going and going. And I think we're all going to be spending a lot of time down here piecing together the full story about what this vault has really been up to. But for today, that is it. Coming into this update, there were some pretty wild theories regarding the nature of this storm, and despite all my exploration in part 1, I'm still no closer to really knowing what on earth is going on here. But I will say this update on first viewing is shaping up to be a really interesting addition that I can't wait to dive into more. The new region is often a hellscape to travel through, but comes with plenty of new lore to discover, and some very interesting creatures too. Very interested to get people's thoughts on Skyline Valley so far down in the comments. I'd love to read them. If you enjoyed this particular video, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. We'll have plenty more Fallout videos releasing very soon, so turning on the bell icon is definitely the best way to stay up to date. With that said though, I'm off. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.